No ship appeared on the scanners. No hyperspace signature registered. Yet something fell from the void between stars, leaving only questions and the echo of impossible warriors in its wake. The Empire had cataloged every known species, mapped every slave world, and believed they understood the fundamental nature of power itself. But on a routine extraction operation on the mining world of Lothal, Imperial Overseer Callus would learn that some forces transcend technology. Some warriors exist outside the carefully ordered systems of galactic control, and some men refuse to remain slaves no matter what universe tries to chain them. The rift tore through reality above Lothal's northern mining territories with a sound like reality itself screaming. Spartacus felt the ground vanish beneath his feet, felt his gladius swing through empty air, where a Roman legionnaire's throat had been a heartbeat before, felt his army of freed slaves cry out in confusion as the battlefield of southern Italy dissolved into impossible, light and crushing pressure. Then impact. 70,000 warriors struck alien soil with the force of a meteor strike, bodies tumbling across rocky terrain that wasn't Italy, under stars that weren't Earth's constellations, beneath twin moons that had no place in any sky Spartacus had ever seen. He rose first. He always rose first, his Thracian war cry cutting through the confusion. As his people struggled to their feet, Crixus emerged from the dust, blood streaming from a gash across his Gallic features. His expression twisted between rage and incomprehension. Gannicus laughed, because of course he did, even as he helped Saxa to her feet. Agron protected Nasir, shield raised against threats he couldn't yet identify. Naivia's sword was already drawn, her eyes scanning for enemies. Spartacus, Crixus's voice carried across the disoriented mass of warriors. What trickery is this? What sorcery? Spartacus had no answers. The air tasted wrong, metallic, processed. The sky was the wrong color. And in the distance, rising from the rocky plains like monuments to an alien god, were structures of metal and light that dwarfed any Roman architecture. Form ranks, Spartacus commanded, his voice cutting through panic, with the authority that had held an army together against Rome itself. Shield wall formation. We understand nothing. Therefore we prepare for everything. His people obeyed because they'd learned that. Spartacus's instincts kept them alive. 70,000 former slaves, gladiators, and rebels arranged themselves into defensive positions with the discipline earned through years of impossible survival. That's when they heard the screams. Human screams. Alien screams. The universal language of suffering that Spartacus knew better than his own name. They came from beyond a ridge, accompanied by sounds he didn't recognize, sharp cracks like thunder, mechanical whirring, and voices barking orders in a language that wasn't Latin but somehow felt just as cruel. Spartacus moved before thought, instinct driving him toward those screams the way it always had. Crixus and 50 of his best gladiators followed without question. They crested the ridge and found a sight that transformed confusion into crystalline, terrible clarity. A mining camp sprawled below them. Hundreds of beings, some human, some distinctly not, labored in chains, under the watchful presence of figures in white armor. The armored figures carried weapons that crackled with energy, and when one slave stumbled, exhausted, one of the guards raised his weapon and fired. The beam of red light struck the fallen slave, and the body simply stopped. No blood, just death, delivered with casual efficiency. Spartacus had seen Romans crucify thousands. He'd watched children sold at auction. He'd worn chains himself, felt the whip, tasted the particular flavor of powerlessness that came from being property. This place, these beings in white armor overseeing beings in chains, wasn't Rome, but it was close enough. Jupiter's cock, Gannicus whispered, his usual humor evaporated. New world. Same fucking chains. The overseer, a human in a gray imperial uniform, noticed them then. His expression shifted from confusion to alarm as he processed the sight of armed warriors in primitive armor standing on the ridge. He barked orders into a device at his wrist, words Spartacus didn't understand, but whose meaning was universal. Enemies sighted, call for reinforcements. The stormtroopers raised their blasters toward the ridge. 12 white-armored soldiers against 50 battle-hardened gladiators. They should have known better. For those in chains, Spartacus said quietly, his gladius catching the alien sunlight. For those who suffer. For those who dream of freedom. Once again, we fight. He charged, and his gladiators followed with the roar of men who'd already died once and no longer feared it. The stormtroopers opened fire, crimson bolts screaming toward the approaching warriors. 3 gladiators fell in the first volley. Holes burned clean through their bodies, deaths unlike any they'd faced before. But the survivors adapted with the terrible speed of arena veterans, weaving, dodging, using their shields not for arrows but for these new projectiles of light. The distance closed. The stormtroopers had seconds to realize their mistake. They'd been trained for suppression fire, for ranged combat, for enemies who fought with blasters at 50 meters, not for gladiators who'd spent years learning to close gaps against better-armed opponents. Spartacus's gladius found the gap between helmet and armor on the first stormtrooper. Crixus's axe sheared through another's weapon arm. Gannicus danced between 2 troopers, his dual swords finding weak points, with the precision of a man who'd survived the arena by understanding anatomy better than any physician. 12 stormtroopers, 12 bodies in white armor, leaking red blood that proved they were just men beneath the strange shells. Men who died when you cut them, just like Romans, just like any oppressor. The slaves in the camp watched, frozen in disbelief, as warriors from another time and place tore through their captors with brutal efficiency. The overseer tried to flee, screaming into his comm device. But Agron's spear found his spine. Spartacus approached the nearest slave, a human woman with hollow eyes and burn scars on her wrists where shackles had chafed. He knelt before her, gladius still dripping, and met her eyes with an intensity that transcended language. "I am Spartacus," he said in Latin, knowing she wouldn't understand the words, but hoping she'd understand the meaning. "I was a slave. I am a slave no more. And neither are you." He shattered her chains with his sword, the alien metal yielding to Thracian steel with a satisfying crack. The woman stared at her freed wrists, then at Spartacus, then at the impossible warriors who'd appeared from nowhere to do what no one in this galaxy had done. For her, fight for her. Freedom, expecting nothing in return. She spoke in a language Spartacus didn't know, but her tone carried gratitude, wonder, and desperate hope. Other slaves approached, chains rattling, voices rising in what might have been questions or prayers. Crixus surveyed the camp with a warrior's eye. "Spartacus, there are hundreds here, and I see shelter, food stores, and weapons we don't understand. This place can be defended." "Then we defend it," Spartacus declared. He turned to face his army, now descending from the ridge to witness this first victory in an unknown world. "Once we rose against Rome. We shattered our chains and proved that slaves could fight as well as any legion. This," he gestured at the alien sky, the strange structures, the freed slaves watching with desperate hope. "This is not Rome. But I see chains. I see masters who kill with ease and without mercy. I see beings who suffer under boots and whips." His voice rose, carrying across the camp. "So we fight, as we have always fought, until every chain is broken, until every slave is free, until we stand victorious or fall with honor." "Who am I?" "Spartacus." His army roared back, the ritual response that had sustained them through impossible odds. "Who are we?" "Spartacus." 70,000 voices, human and now mingled, with alien freed slaves who didn't understand the words but grasped the meaning, united in defiant thunder. Above them, Imperial communications satellites relayed urgent messages to the garrison. Stormtrooper squads mobilized. Officers scrambled to understand reports of primitive insurgents using melee weapons to overwhelm trained soldiers. And in the Imperial intelligence network, the first confused reports began their journey toward decision-makers who would soon learn what Rome had learned 2,000 years ago. Underestimate Spartacus at your peril. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The Imperial garrison on Lothal had been designed to suppress miners, not warriors. The distinction would prove fatal. Commander Oresco reviewed the initial reports with growing irritation. his thin mustache twitching as he processed information that made no tactical sense. 12 stormtroopers dead. An entire mining camp liberated. Security footage showing men in primitive armor wielding swords, actual metal swords, cutting through trained Imperial soldiers like they were practice dummies. Impossible, Oresco muttered, replaying the grainy footage. A warrior with long hair and a red cloak moved through the frame with such fluid brutality that the commander had to watch 3 times to track the killing strokes. Primitive weapons. No armor. They should have been cut down in seconds. Sir, the footage doesn't lie, his lieutenant offered carefully. Whatever these insurgents are, they're extremely effective in close quarters. And intelligence suggests there are thousands of them, possibly tens of thousands. Oresco felt the first cold touch of genuine concern. Mobilize the garrison. For companies of stormtroopers, with armored support. Add ST walkers for intimidation and firepower. We'll crush this uprising before it spreads. He paused, studying the warrior in red who seemed to lead the others. And find out who this one is. Someone doesn't move like that without significant combat experience. In the liberated mining camp, Spartacus faced his own impossible situation. The freed slaves, over 300, beings of species he'd never imagined, tried to explain their galaxy through words he couldn't understand and gestures that bridged language barriers. A young human woman named Thara, who spoke the common tongue of Basic, attempted to serve as translator through crude pantomime and drawings in the dust. Empire, she said, pointing at the white armor of fallen stormtroopers. Rules. Everything. All worlds. She spread her arms wide, trying to convey scale. Not just one land. All lands. In sky. She pointed upward. Many worlds. Empire owns. Spartacus processed this, his tactical mind working through the implications. How many soldiers does this empire command? Thara's face fell as she struggled to make him understand numbers beyond Roman comprehension. She drew in the dirt. First one figure, then 10, then 100, then gave up and simply drew endless rows of marks until the ground was covered. More than counting, more than stars. Crixus, listening nearby, spat. Rome claimed to rule the world. Now we find an empire that claims to rule the sky itself. Jupiter's cock, we trade one set of masters for another. No. Spartacus's voice carried absolute conviction. We trade nothing. We take freedom, as we always have. He turned to address the gathering crowd of freed slaves and his own warriors. I see confusion in your eyes. We understand little of this place. These weapons of light. These metal beasts that fly. He gestured at a grounded Imperial shuttle. All strange to us. But I see what matters. I see chains. I see those who suffer. I see an empire that believes might makes right. His gladius caught the light as he raised it. We've defeated an empire before. We can do it again. Gannicus approached, carrying one of the stormtrooper blasters he'd been examining. These weapons, Spartacus. They kill from distance. Our shields slow them, but don't stop them. If this empire comes with hundreds of these, he didn't need to finish. Then we do what we always do, Spartacus replied. We adapt. Show me. For the next hours, Spartacus and his best fighters studied the captured weapons. The blasters were simple enough in concept. Point, pull trigger, enemy dies. The gladiators, who'd spent years mastering balance and weapon weight, learned quickly, not with the precision of trained soldiers, but with the desperate efficiency of survivors who understood that learning meant living. Naivia proved surprisingly adept, her smaller frame handling the blaster's recoil better than many of the larger men. It feels wrong, she admitted, to kill without looking in their eyes, without feeling the blade strike home. It feels like survival, Agron countered, checking his own captured blaster. And survival is never wrong. The alien slaves watched these primitive warriors examine Imperial technology with the intensity of students before masters. Some began to hope. Others, who'd spent years learning that hope was more painful than despair, simply watched and waited. Spartacus felt it, that familiar weight of command, the knowledge that thousands depended on his decisions. Crixus, take 200 men. Scout the surrounding terrain. Find defensible positions, water sources, and… He paused, considering the alien landscape. Whatever these people need to survive. Agron, organize the freed slaves. Learn who has skills we can use. Gannicus. Let me guess. The champion gladiator interrupted with a grin. You want me to figure out how to kill more Romans? Excuse me. Imperials, with their own weapons? Yes. And teach others. Spartacus turned to Thara, speaking slowly, hoping she'd understand enough to translate. Tell your people, all of them, they are free now. But freedom requires strength. Those who wish to fight, we will teach. Those who cannot, we will protect. But no one wears chains again. The message spread through the camp in a dozen languages. And Spartacus watched reactions shift from disbelief to tentative hope too. In some faces, the hard determination that he recognized from his own rebellion's early days. An alien with blue skin and head tails, a Twi'lek. Though Spartacus didn't know the name, stepped forward and pantomimed combat training. Aradian clutched a fallen stormtrooper's helmet and nodded with grim purpose. The rebellion was growing. Just like before. 3 days later, the Empire arrived in force. Spartacus stood on a ridge overlooking the mining camp, now fortified with improvised barriers and traps that would have made his Roman campaign engineers proud. Behind him, his army had swelled to nearly 75,000, his original force plus freed slaves, who'd chosen to fight. They'd learned the basics of blaster usage through captured weapons. Though ammunition was precious, the Imperial force approached from the east, 400 stormtroopers, in perfect formation, supported by massive two-legged walkers that stood as tall as buildings. ADST scouts, Thara had called them, explaining through gestures that their weapons could destroy the camp from range. Crixus studied the walkers with tactical interest. They're like elephants. Hannibal used them against Rome. Big, imposing, but he smiled grimly. Elephants can be killed. You target the legs, they fall. Can our weapons hurt them? Spartacus asked. The blasters, maybe. But I have a better idea. Crixus gestured to where his Gauls had spent the last days preparing. We dig like we did at Vesuvius. Pit traps, covered and camouflaged. These metal beasts are heavy. They'll fall through. And once they're down, we swarm them. Spartacus nodded approval, but his attention remained fixed on the approaching stormtroopers. 400 disciplined. Soldiers with superior weapons. And armor against 75,000. Warriors of whom only his original gladiators had real combat experience. The math was different than it had been against Rome. These weapons killed faster, from farther away, but the principle remained. Superior forces could be defeated through terrain, tactics, and the willingness to pay a higher price than your enemy thought possible. They expect us to defend the camp, Spartacus said quietly, to wait behind our barriers like slaves wait in their pens. And instead, Agron asked, though his smile suggested he already knew. Instead, we remember what we are. Not defenders, not soldiers standing in ranks. Spartacus's eyes blazed with the fire that had sustained a rebellion across Italy. We are gladiators. We are hunters. We are wolves. He turned to face his assembled commanders. Crixus, hold 2,000 at the camp. Everyone else splits into smaller groups. We don't meet their formation with our formation. We hit them from every angle, from shadows, from high ground. We make every step they take toward our camp cost them blood. The gladiators grinned. This was a language they understood. Arena tactics scaled to warfare. Multiple opponents attacking from unexpected angles, making strength meaningless through speed and positioning. As the sun set over Lothal, the Imperial formation advanced with mechanical precision. Commander Oresco, watching from his command at ST, felt confident. Overwhelming force, superior technology, and the full weight of imperial doctrine against primitive insurgents. This would be a textbook suppression. The first pit trap opened, beneath an Attestes front leg at precisely the moment 3 dozen warriors with captured blasters opened fire from surrounding ridges. The walker stumbled, crashed, and before the crew could react, gladiators swarmed it like ants on a fallen giant. They pried open hatches with swords and spears, dragging the pilots out. The stormtrooper formation shifted to address the threat, and that's when Spartacus's main force hit their flank. Not in formation, but in waves, gladiators sprinting between cover, closing distance with inhuman speed. And when the blaster fire became too intense, diving behind rocks only to emerge elsewhere. They moved like they'd fought in the arena, unpredictable, aggressive, and utterly without fear of death. A stormtrooper sergeant watched 3 warriors charge his position and ordered his squad to open fire. 2 of the warriors fell, but the third, a massive Gaul wielding a captured shield, closed the distance and his axe found the gap between armor plates. The sergeant's last thought was confusion. How do you fight enemies who accept casualties that should break any sane force? Commander Oresco realized his mistake too late. His formation, designed for suppressing cowering populations, had been broken into isolated pockets. His AD-STs, targeted with surprising accuracy, were being disabled one by one. And these insurgents fought with a ferocity that reminded him of horror stories from the Clone Wars, the kind of enemy that didn't retreat, didn't surrender, and made every meter of advance cost more than it was worth. All units, fall back to Rally Point Gamma, Oresco ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Retreat in formation. But Spartacus had learned long ago that retreating enemies were vulnerable enemies. His forces pursued, turning the Imperial retreat into a rout. By the time the surviving Imperials reached their transport ships, they'd lost 217 stormtroopers and 4 AD-STs. The primitive insurgents had somehow defeated a modern military force. In the aftermath, Spartacus walked among his own, dead, 43 gladiators and freed slaves who'd chosen to fight, rather than remain victims. He knew each face, spoke a quiet prayer to gods who might not exist in this strange sky, and felt the familiar weight of command that came with sending people to die for an idea. Dhara approached, her face showing a mixture of awe and terror. They'll come back. With more. With ships from the sky. With weapons that destroy cities. She struggled to make him understand the scale of what he'd just provoked. Empire doesn't lose. Empire always wins. Spartacus turned to her, his expression carrying the weight of a man who'd already died once in spirit and learned to live anyway. Rome said the same. Rome was wrong. He looked past her to where his people, gladiators, and freed slaves together, were stripping the fallen of weapons and armor. Tell your people this. Spartacus has returned. And this time, I will break every chain in the sky. In orbit above Lothal, Imperial communications transmitted urgent reports toward the core worlds. The message was simple, alarming, and unprecedented. A primitive force had defeated a full Imperial garrison using nothing but courage, tactics, and the kind of warriors the Empire had assumed extinct. The reports would reach Coruscant within days. They would reach Rebel Alliance intelligence shortly after. And throughout the Outer Rim, in slave camps and mining operations across 100 worlds, rumors would begin to spread of warriors from another time, led by a man named Spartacus, who'd done the impossible. They'd made the Empire bleed. The battle droids of the Separatist Alliance had been designed for predictable warfare, suppressing populations, holding territory, executing programmed combat routines. The Empire's stormtroopers, trained in the aftermath of the Clone Wars, had inherited similar tactical doctrine, overwhelming firepower, numerical superiority, and the assumption that fear would do half the work. Neither military tradition had prepared the galaxy for warriors who fought like they had nothing left to lose because they'd already lost everything once before. Commander Oresco's report reached Imperial High Command on Coruscant, simultaneously, with surveillance footage that military analysts watched with growing unease. Admiral Cassius Constantine, reviewing the data from his Star Destroyer in orbit, felt his career ambitions shrinking. With each replay of primitive warriors dismantling trained stormtroopers, ground them, Constantine ordered his tactical officer, I want TIE fighter strikes on every suspected insurgent position. Surgical orbital bombardment on their main camp. We'll burn this primitive rabble from above and be done with it. Sir, his intelligence officer interrupted carefully. The insurgents have taken positions within the civilian mining settlements. Orbital strikes would kill thousands of Imperial assets. The slaves represent significant economic value. Constantine's jaw clenched. The Empire's own economic model had become a tactical liability. Then we do it the hard way. Deploy the full garrison, 2,000 stormtroopers. AT-AT Walker support and air superiority. I want every insurgent dead or in binders within 48 hours. On Lothal's surface, Spartacus stood in what his people now called the War Room, a commandeered imperial facility where holographic displays showed terrain they were learning to read. Dara and other freed slaves who understood the technology tried to explain concepts that had no equivalent in Spartacus's experience. Orbital bombardment, atmospheric fighters, sensors that could detect body heat from kilometers away. They see us from the sky, Dara explained, gesturing at a display showing imperial reconnaissance patterns. Their ships have eyes that pierce darkness, count our numbers, track our movements. Spartacus absorbed this, his tactical mind adapting ancient guerrilla principles to impossible technology. Then we move constantly. Never sleep in the same place twice. Use the mines. He pointed at the tunnel networks that honeycombed Lothal's surface, the way we used mountains in Italia. And we make them fear coming close, because close is where we kill them. Crixus entered, his armor now adorned with pieces of stormtrooper plating he'd claimed as trophies. The scouts report Imperial movement, large force, moving in formation from the north. And something else, massive metal beasts, larger than the two-legged ones. For legs, tall as temples. Adat walkers, Dara whispered, her face going pale. Empire's heaviest ground assault vehicles. Their armor is too thick for our weapons. Their cannons can destroy buildings. Gannicus, who'd been studying captured Imperial weapons with obsessive focus, looked up. Everything has weak points. Everything. In the arena, we learned, you can't hurt the giant everywhere. So you hurt him where it matters. The neck joint, Naevia suggested, having spent weeks studying the walker footage. Where the head connects to the body. Less armor there. And the legs, Agron added. We've seen them walk. They're slower than the two-legged ones. If we can trip them, make them fall. Spartacus smiled, recognizing the gladiatorial thinking. Then we turn their size against them. Crixus, how much cable did we salvage from the mining operations? The Gaul's eyes lit with understanding. Enough to rig a dozen traps. You're thinking what I'm thinking. I'm thinking these. Walkers are like elephants at Zama. Impressive until they're on their side. Spartacus turned to address the assembled commanders, his original gladiators plus former slaves who'd proven themselves in battle. We can't match their weapons. We can't match their armor. But we can match their will to fight, and we can be where they don't expect us. The Empire thinks in straight lines, in formations, in the kind of warfare where both sides agree to stand and trade blows. His voice dropped to the deadly calm that preceded his most brutal tactics. We teach them what happens when one side refuses to play by those rules. The Imperial force arrived at dawn. 2,000 stormtroopers in disciplined ranks supported by 6 Adat walkers that strode across Lothal's plains like mechanical gods. From the lead walker's command pod, Commander Oresco felt a surge of confidence. This was Imperial might incarnate, organized, overwhelming, unstoppable. The mining camp appeared abandoned as they approached, which should have been the first warning. The second warning came when the lead ATAT's front leg punched through camouflaged ground into a pit, filled with sharpened metal stakes salvaged from mining equipment. The massive walker stumbled, but didn't fall, its redundant systems compensating, but the momentary loss of momentum was enough. 50 gladiators emerged from concealed positions among the rocks, sprinting toward the compromised walker with desperate speed. They carried coils of cable liberated from mining equipment, and they moved with the coordination of arena veterans who'd practiced this exact maneuver for 3 days straight. Blaster fire from supporting stormtroopers cut down 15 warriors before they reached the walker, but the survivors split into 2 groups, circling the massive legs while under sustained fire. They wrapped the cable around the walker's limbs with the practiced efficiency of men who'd spent years rigging arena traps, then dove for cover as the walker tried to advance. The cable went taut. The ATAT's forward momentum carried it one more step. And then basic physics betrayed the Empire's engineering. The walker's front legs tangled, its weight shifted, and with a groan of stressed metal, the massive machine toppled forward. The impact shook the ground like an earthquake, and before the stunned crew could recover, gladiators were climbing the fallen giant, prying open hatches with crowbars and swords. All walkers target the insurgents directly. Oresco screamed into his calm. Stormtroopers advance and provide cover fire. But Spartacus had learned from studying Imperial tactics. They communicated through those devices at their wrists and helmets. Cut the communication and discipline fractured. His best blaster-trained warriors had spent days learning to target specific points on Stormtrooper armor. And now they put that knowledge to use. Concentrated fire from concealed positions struck the Stormtrooper formation's command section. Officers fell, their comm system sparking. The disciplined advance faltered as squad leaders tried to restore communication protocols while under fire from enemies they couldn't locate. That's when Spartacus led the main assault from the flank. Not a charge, but a controlled advance using every scrap of cover. Moving in small groups that made targeting difficult. 3,000 warriors, half carrying captured blasters, half wielding traditional weapons, hitting the Imperial line where it was already wavering. The Stormtroopers had superior weapons, superior armor, and superior position. But they'd been trained to fight enemies who played by Imperial rules, enemies who would break when faced with overwhelming force, who would surrender when defeat became certain. They hadn't been trained for gladiators who'd survived years in the arena, who'd learned that sometimes the only way to win was to accept horrific casualties and keep fighting anyway. A Gaul named Brictius took 3 blaster bolts to the chest and still managed to close with his target, his axe finding the gap between helmet and chest plate. A former slave named Marcus, who'd fought for his freedom with nothing but a sharpened mining tool, died tackling a stormtrooper so his brothers could finish the kill. Saxa, the fierce German warrior woman, fought with 2 captured blasters, laughing as she waded into fire that should have killed her 3 times over. The stormtrooper line broke. Not completely. These were trained soldiers, but enough. That cohesion shattered into isolated pockets, fighting for survival rather than executing a battle plan. Oresco, watching his tactical display dissolve into chaos, made the decision that would define the rest of his short career. All units, fighting retreat. At ATS, provide covering fire and fall back to the shuttle landing zone. The withdrawal might have succeeded if Spartacus hadn't anticipated it. His forces had already circled behind the Imperial position, and when the stormtroopers turned to retreat, they found themselves facing warriors who'd spent years learning to cut off Roman retreat routes. The battle became a massacre. By the time the surviving Imperials reached their shuttles, they'd lost over 800 stormtroopers and 4 AT-AT walkers. The primitive insurgents had defeated a modern military force twice in as many weeks. But victory came with brutal cost. Spartacus walked through the aftermath, past bodies of men and women he'd known, who'd trusted him to lead them to freedom. 537 dead, another 300 wounded, some with injuries that the captured Imperial medical supplies couldn't fully treat. Crixus found him standing over the body of Brictius, the Gaul who'd taken impossible wounds and fought anyway. He died a warrior's death, Spartacus. In his homeland, they'd sing of it. In his homeland, he'd still be alive, Spartacus replied quietly. We trade lives for victories, and I wonder sometimes if the price is worth paying. You know it is, Naevius said, approaching with Agron. Her hands were still bloody from helping tend the wounded. Every slave we free, every Imperial we kill, it matters. You taught us that. You showed us that dying on our feet beats living on our knees. Spartacus nodded, but the weight remained. Command always carried weight. Gannicus interrupted the moment, dragging a captured Imperial officer, a lieutenant with terror written across his young face. This one was screaming into his device before we took him, asking for something called a Star Destroyer, to come down and glass the entire region. What does glass mean? Dhara, translating, went pale. It means turning the ground to glass with heat. Ships from orbit, burning everything. Cities, people, everything. She looked at Spartacus with desperate urgency. You've won battles, but you've made the Empire notice you. They'll send more. They'll send everything. Then we make them regret it, Spartacus said simply. He turned to the captured lieutenant, speaking through Dhara's translation. You will return to your empire. You will tell them Spartacus offers terms, free every slave in this sector, and we'll let your soldiers leave alive. Refuse, and we'll kill every Imperial who sets foot on this world. The lieutenant stared at him with disbelief. You can't win. You're primitives with stolen weapons against the entire Imperial military machine. You'll all die. Spartacus's smile carried no humor. We've already died. We died the day we were put in chains. What stands before you now is something your empire has never faced, dead men who refuse to stay down. He let the officer go, knowing the message would reach Imperial command, knowing it would make them send more forces, knowing each victory would cost more lives, but also knowing that somewhere in this vast galaxy, other slaves would hear about Spartacus, would hear that someone fought back, would remember that chains could be broken. In orbit, Admiral Constantine reviewed the battle reports with mounting fury. 2 defeats, thousands of stormtroopers lost, Imperial equipment captured, and worst of all, rumors spreading. Other mining worlds were reporting unrest. Slaves were whispering about warriors from another time who refused to submit. Send a message to Coruscant, Constantine ordered. Request full Star Destroyer, battle group, and authorization for total pacification protocols. These insurgents think they can fight the Empire. His voice dropped to cold certainty. We'll show them what happens to those who defy order. But in the slave camps across Lothal, and in whispered conversations across a dozen worlds, hope kindled like a flame. The Empire had always seemed invincible, inevitable, eternal. But Spartacus and his impossible warriors had proven something revolutionary. The Empire could bleed. And if it could bleed, perhaps it could die. The Rebel Alliance had been watching Lothal for 3 weeks, ever since their intelligence network picked up Imperial communications about unprecedented insurgent activity and primitive forces employing non-standard tactics. Captain Hera Syndulla, monitoring Imperial frequencies from her ghost starship in a neighboring system, had initially dismissed it as typical Imperial exaggeration, local dissidents with improvised weapons, causing minor disruptions. Then the casualty reports started coming in. Real numbers, verified losses, an entire Imperial garrison defeated, AT-AT walkers destroyed by warriors using cable and swords, stormtrooper formations broken by enemies, who charged into blaster fire like it was rain. This doesn't make sense, Hera said, reviewing the intercepted footage for the 5th time. The holographic display showed a warrior in crimson cloak moving through stormtroopers with a blade, each strike economical and lethal. These fighters, they're not using guerrilla tactics like we do. They're not even using proper cover. They're just attacking, like they don't care if they die. Kanan Jarrus, her Jedi companion, studied the footage with troubled eyes. I don't sense them in the Force. At all. It's like they don't exist in the usual way. He paused. There's something else. The way they fight. I've seen recordings of old Republic gladiatorial games. This looks like that. Arena combat scaled to warfare. Whoever they are, they're hurting the Empire badly, Sabine Wren observed, her Mandalorian tactical training evident in how she analyzed the footage. And the Empire's response is going to be massive. Constantine's already requested a battle group. Hera made a decision. We make contact. If these insurgents are real, if they're actually winning battles against Imperial forces, the Alliance needs to know. And they'll need our help when the Empire comes back in force. The Ghost dropped out of hyperspace over Lothal at dawn, broadcasting on all frequencies, in basic and a dozen other common languages, unidentified insurgent forces. This is the rebel ship Ghost. We come in peace. We are enemies of the Empire. Request permission to land and speak with your leaders. Spartacus, receiving the translation through the Ra, studied the ship visible in Lothal's sky with tactical suspicion. It was smaller than the Imperial vessels, sleeker, and its weapons weren't targeting his positions. But trust had to be earned with more than words. Tell them they can land, Spartacus decided. But only 3 of them may leave their ship, and they come unarmed. We meet in the open, where both sides can see clearly. The Ghost touched down on a plateau outside the main camp, and 3 figures descended the boarding ramp. A green-skinned Twi'lek woman, a bearded human male, and a young woman with distinctively painted Mandalorian armor. They'd left their visible weapons aboard, though Spartacus noted the human wore something that resembled a sword, hilt at his belt. Spartacus met them with Crixus, Gannicus, and Naevia at his back, all fully armed. 50 gladiators ringed the meeting site at respectful distance. The cultural collision was immediate and stark. The rebels, modern flight suits and armor against leather, bronze, and steel that looked like it belonged in a museum. Hera spoke first, Dara translating in real time. I am Captain Hera Syndulla of the Rebel Alliance. We've been monitoring Imperial communications about your victories against their forces. We've come to offer support. Support, Spartacus repeated, his eyes sharp with suspicion earned through years of Roman politics. What manner of support? And what price does it carry? No price, Cannon said. We fight the empire because it's tyrannical, oppressive. Because it keeps slaves, Spartacus interrupted, his voice carrying an edge. Dara's translation made his meaning clear. Let us speak plainly. I see beings who dress as warriors but speak carefully, like politicians. You want something from us. Hera appreciated the directness. Yes, we want to coordinate. The Rebel Alliance has been fighting the Empire for years, across hundreds of worlds. We have ships, weapons, intelligence networks. You have. She gestured at the captured Imperial equipment visible in the camp. Proven you can hurt the Empire in direct combat. Together, we could. Free the slaves, Spartacus finished. Yes? That is your goal. The question hung in the air, and Hera felt the weight of it. The Rebel Alliance fought for freedom, for democracy, for the restoration of the Republic. But did they fight specifically to free slaves? We fight for freedom for everyone, she said carefully. That is not the same thing, Crixus growled. We don't fight for ideas. We fight for the man and woman in chains. Show us your rebellion has freed slaves, real people, not promises, and we talk. Otherwise, you're just another group seeking power while others suffer. Cannon stepped forward, and his hand moved toward his belt. Instantly, 50 gladiators raised weapons, blasters, and swords both. The Jedi froze, hands visible. I'm not drawing a weapon. I want to show you something. He slowly unclipped his lightsaber hilt and ignited it. The green blade hummed to life, and Spartacus's eyes widened fractionally, the first time. The rebels had seen surprise on his stoic features. I am a Jedi, Cannon explained. Guardians of peace and justice. The Empire hunts my kind, tries to erase us. I understand what it means to fight for survival against impossible odds. Spartacus studied the energy blade with tactical interest. This weapon, it cuts through anything. Most things, yes. And your Jedi, they fight the Empire? Those few of us who survive do, yes. Spartacus nodded slowly, processing. Then he gestured to Naivia, who stepped forward and pulled aside her tunic to reveal the network of scars. Across her back, the remnants of years of whipping. I was a slave, she said through Dara's translation. Beaten, used, treated as property. Spartacus freed me, taught me to fight, showed me that slaves could become warriors. Everything I am, I owe to the fact that someone chose to fight for those in chains. Not for politics or power, but because it was right. She locked eyes with Hera. Your rebellion, has it freed any slaves? Has it stormed the camps, broken the chains, given beings like me the chance to stand? The question cut deeper than any blade. Hera knew the truth. The Rebel Alliance focused on strategic targets, on weakening the Empire's military and political infrastructure. They freed slaves when it aligned with tactical objectives. But it wasn't their primary mission. They fought for a free galaxy eventually, not for individual freedom immediately. We fight in ways that will ultimately free everyone, Hera said. But she heard how weak it sounded even as Dara translated. Ultimately, Spartacus repeated, his voice cold. A word politicians use when they mean not today. The slaves suffering now don't care about ultimately. They care about right now, this moment, this day. He turned as if to walk away. We have nothing more to discuss. Wait, Sabine called out. The young Mandalorian stepped forward, her body language shifting to something more confrontational. You're right. The Alliance moves slowly, thinks strategically. But you know what? You're going to die if you don't accept our help. That Star Destroyer battle group Constantine requested? It's already en route. 6 Star Destroyers, plus support craft. Thousands of stormtroopers. TIE fighter wings. And they're not coming to capture you. They're coming to kill everyone on this planet. Gannicus laughed, the dark laugh of a man who'd heard death threats before. Let them come. We've killed hundreds of their soldiers already. You've killed soldiers on the ground, Sabine countered. But you can't reach orbit. Those Star Destroyers will bombard from space. Turn your camps to ash. Kill every freed slave, every gladiator, everyone. She gestured at the sky. You fight like warriors from another age because you are warriors from another age. But this age has weapons that kill from distances you can't imagine. Spartacus turned back, and Hera saw calculation in his eyes, the look of a commander weighing options. If what you say is true, then staying here means death. What do you suggest? Evacuation, Hera said quickly. We have contacts with smuggler networks. Sympathetic systems in the outer rim. We can move your people. No. Spartacus's voice carried absolute finality. We don't run. We've run before, across Italia, always chased. Running ends with Roman spears in our backs. Running ends with death anyway, just slower. Then you'll die here, Cannon said bluntly. Is that what you want for your people? Another glorious last stand that changes nothing. The word struck home. Spartacus's face tightened with barely controlled emotion. I have led these people through impossible odds. I have watched thousands die for the dream of freedom. And every time, I wonder if their deaths matter. If their sacrifice changes anything. Or if we're just making ourselves feel better by dying with swords in our hands instead of chains on our wrists. He looked at his commanders, Crixus, who'd been with him since the beginning, Gannicus, who fought more for brotherhood than ideology, Naivia, who'd transformed from victim to warrior. What say you? Do we trust these rebels who speak of freedom but don't prioritize it? Do we accept help from those who fight the same enemy but not the same war? Crixus spat. I say we trust no one but ourselves. We've been betrayed before. I say we're dead either way. Gannicus offered with characteristic fatalism. Might as well die alongside others who hate the empire, even if they hate it for different reasons. Naivia spoke last, her voice quiet but firm. I say we think of the slaves we've freed, the hundreds who chose to follow us, who believe in what we're doing. We owe them more than a glorious death. We owe them a chance. Spartacus closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, he'd made a decision. Here are my terms, rebels. We will coordinate with your alliance, but we do not answer to it. When you plan operations, we participate if they free slaves, directly, immediately, not as future consequences. We keep our own command structure, our own methods. And when this war ends, however it ends, the slaves must be freed. All of them. Not gradually, not eventually, all of them. That is non-negotiable. Heron nodded slowly. I can't speak for Alliance Command, but I can take your message to them. And I can tell you this. What you've done here, defeating Imperial forces, with primitive weapons and sheer determination, that inspires people. If you're willing to fight alongside us, you could inspire slaves across the galaxy to rise up. Inspiration without action is just pretty words, Spartacus replied. Show me action. Show me your alliance actually cares about those in chains, and you'll have your coordination. Sabine pulled up a datapad. I've got something. Imperial slave transport, departing Ryloth in 3 days. Carrying 500 Twi'lek slaves to the spice mines of Kessel. Standard escort, 2 Imperial frigates, minimal fighter support. We could hit it, free the slaves. It's risky, but we do it, Spartacus said immediately. Your ships, our warriors. We board their vessel. Free the slaves, and prove that your rebellion fights for more than just political change. He extended his arm in a warrior's clasp. You say you fight for freedom. Show me. Hera gripped his forearm, feeling the calloused strength there. You've got a deal. But we do this smart. Our tactics. Our experience with space combat. Your people for the boarding action. Agreed. But understand this. Rebel. Spartacus's eyes held the weight of years of betrayal and lost faith. If your alliance proves to be just another empire wearing different colors, you'll find we're very good at fighting empires. Or it'll remind them what we're supposed to be fighting for, Hera replied. She looked back at Spartacus, who stood with his gladiators, already planning the next battle. The alliance has been fighting the empire for years. We've won some battles, lost more, but we've never made them afraid. Those gladiators? They make the empire afraid. That's worth something. In orbit, Admiral Constantine received confirmation that the battle group was 2 days out. Soon, this primitive uprising would be crushed and order would be restored. The empire's dominance would be reaffirmed. He had no idea that the primitives had just gained access to starships, intelligence networks, and coordination with a rebel movement that spanned the galaxy. He had no idea that Spartacus, who'd nearly brought Rome to its knees with far less, was about to learn how to fight a galactic war. And he had no idea that in slave camps across a dozen worlds, prisoners were already whispering a name that hadn't existed in their galaxy until 3 weeks ago, a name that was becoming synonymous with hope. Spartacus. The Imperial slave transport subjugator left Rylotha's orbit right on schedule. Its holds packed with 500 Twi'lek prisoners bound for the spice mines of Kessel. The ship's captain, a career officer named Turret, ran his vessel with bureaucratic efficiency, slaves processed, manifests filed, escort frigates maintaining proper formation. Everything by the book. Everything predictable. That predictability would kill him. The Ghost emerged from hyperspace at the ambush coordinates with 3 other rebel ships, a modified YT-2400 freighter, a Comar K-class fighter, and a battered Consular-class cruiser that had seen better decades. Not an impressive fleet by military standards, but enough to engage 2 Imperial frigates if the timing was perfect. Inside the Ghost's hold, Spartacus stood with 50 of his best gladiators, all wearing a mix of their traditional armor and captured Imperial gear. The interior of the starship still unsettled him, flying through the void between worlds in a metal box that hummed with unfamiliar energy. But discomfort was irrelevant. Slaves needed freeing, and he'd learned long ago to adapt to any battlefield. Remember, Hera's voice came through the internal comm, translated by the Ra who stood among the boarding party. We disable their shields. You breach their hull using these, she provided them with magnetic breach charges, and then you have maybe 10 minutes before they can seal sections and vent atmosphere. Fast in, fast out. Crixus hefted a captured blaster rifle, having spent the last 3 days learning to use it with deadly proficiency. Fast and brutal. The arena way. The Empire uses slave collars, Thara added, her own Twi'lek heritage giving her voice extra weight. Electronic restraints around their necks. Any attempt to remove them improperly triggers lethal shock. There are override codes, but then we capture an officer who knows the codes, Spartacus interrupted. Before we kill any of them, we take one alive. Understood? His gladiators nodded. They'd learned to prioritize based on mission requirements. The killing could wait if it meant saving lives. The Ghost shuddered as Hera opened fire on the lead escort frigate. The rebel ships had positioned themselves to appear as simple pirates, a common enough threat in the outer rim that Imperial protocols were standardized. The frigates moved to engage, focusing on the attackers rather than protecting the transport. Textbook response. Predictable. Sabine's voice crackled through the comm. Shields down on the transport in 3, 2, 1 now. The Ghost accelerated, bringing it alongside the subjugator close enough that the vessels nearly touched. Spartacus planted the first breach charge himself, the magnetic clamps holding it against the hull. Back, he ordered, and his gladiators cleared the blast radius. The explosion tore through the transport's hull with a shower of sparks and venting atmosphere. Before the breach could seal, Spartacus was through, gladius in one hand, captured blaster in the other, moving into the ship with the confidence of a man who'd breached Roman fortifications. The first stormtrooper barely had time to raise his weapon before Spartacus's blade found the gap between helmet and chest plate. The second managed to fire. The bolt caught Spartacus in the shoulder, burning through his armor, but the pain only sharpened his focus. His blaster shot took the trooper center mass, and then Crixus was beside him, his galls pouring through the breach like a flood of rage and steel. Find an officer, Spartacus commanded, moving deeper into the ship. The layout was alien, but logic was universal. Prisoners would be in the hold, guards would be concentrated there, and officers would be wherever they could monitor both. They found the security station 3 corridors in, 5 stormtroopers and 1 officer. A lieutenant whose face went pale as gladiators and blood-spattered. Armor materialized from the smoke. The troopers opened fire in the confined space, and 2 of Spartacus's warriors fell, but the rest closed the distance with inhuman speed. Gannicus fought with 2 blasters now, his arena-honed reflexes letting him target and fire faster than the stormtroopers could track. The lieutenant tried to activate an alarm, but Naivia's blade severed his hand at the wrist. He screamed, and Spartacus grabbed him by the throat. The collars, he said in Latin. Thara, coming through behind the main force, translated with urgency. Tell us how to remove the slave collars, or you die slowly. The lieutenant, facing a blade-wielding warrior who looked at him with the eyes of someone who'd seen too much death to fear causing more, broke immediately. Console. Station 12. Override code is 77 Alpha 3. Please. Spartacus released him, letting him collapse, clutching his severed hand. To Agron. Get the codes to Thara. Free them all. Then, to the lieutenant. You enslaved others. You inflicted suffering. But you gave us what we needed. His blade moved with merciful quickness. You die fast. The hold of the subjugator was a scene from Spartacus's nightmares. Rows of Chui, Lex and energy restraints. Their faces showing the hollow despair of beings who'd given up hope. Children huddled against parents. The elderly sat with the stillness of those waiting for death, all wearing the collars that promised death if they resisted. I am Spartacus, he announced in Latin. Thara translating into RYL, the Twi'lek language. I was a slave. I am a slave no more. And neither are you. The collars began deactivating with electronic chirps, one after another, as Thara worked the override codes. The first Twi'lek, to feel his collar fall away, stared at his freed neck with disbelief. Then tears. Then, as understanding spread through the hold, a sound Spartacus had heard before, the sound of people remembering they were people, not property. Move. Crixus's voice cut through the moment. The frigates are breaking off from the rebel ships. They know we're aboard. The evacuation was chaos. 500 freed Twi'leks, most weak from confinement, trying to navigate an imperial ship under the guidance of gladiators, who barely understood the layout themselves. But Spartacus had practiced retreats before, had learned to move civilians through hostile territory. His warriors formed a rear guard, holding corridors against responding stormtroopers while the freed slaves fled toward the breach point. The Ghost and other rebel ships positioned themselves to receive evacuees, their crews working frantically to get bodies aboard before the Imperial frigates could bring their main weapons to bear. One rebel ship, the Old Consular cruiser, took a direct hit from a frigate's turbolaser. It listed atmosphere venting, but its crew kept the docking ports open long enough to get another 100 Twi'leks aboard. Spartacus was the last through the breach, carrying a Twi'lek child who'd been trampled in the rush. Behind him, the subjugator was listing, systems failing, fire spreading. The Ghost sealed its boarding ramp and accelerated away just as the transport's reactor went critical. Jump to hyperspace. Hera ordered, and the stars stretched into lines. In the Ghost's hold, Spartacus sat among his gladiators. 43 had boarded, 38 had returned, and the 500 freed Twi'leks who were only now processing that they were free. A young girl approached him hesitantly, her mother behind her, and spoke in accented basic. You saved us. Spartacus looked at her through Thara's translation, seeing not an alien, but a child who'd worn chains. Yes. Why? The question hung in the air. Why? Because he remembered what it felt like. Because he'd promised himself that if he ever had power, he'd use it to break chains. Because some wars were worth fighting even when you knew you'd probably lose. Because no one should be a slave, he said simply. The transmission reached Rebel Alliance headquarters on Yavin 4 3 days later. Mon Mothma, founder and leader of the Alliance, reviewed the report with her council of advisors. The footage showed primitive warriors fighting alongside rebel operatives to free 500 slaves. Unprecedented coordination, significant imperial losses, and most importantly, proof that direct action against slavery could succeed. This Spartacus, Mon Mothma said, carefully he's demanding we prioritize slave liberation in all our operations. His methods are brutal, Admiral Akbar observed. He doesn't take prisoners when avoidable. His forces suffer casualties that would break any normal military unit. But he wins, General Dodonna countered. Against forces that should annihilate him, he wins. And more importantly, slaves are joining his rebellion. Not the Alliance, his rebellion. We're losing the moral narrative to a gladiator from another universe. Mon Mothma understood the implicit criticism. The Alliance had always positioned itself as the moral alternative to the Empire, but they'd focused on political liberation, restoring the Republic, defeating the Emperor, while tolerating the continuation of slavery in systems they controlled, justifying it as temporary until the larger war was won. We need him, she decided. But more than that, We need what he represents. The alliance has become too focused on winning the war. He reminds us why we're fighting it. She turned to her advisors. Draft new operational priorities. Any alliance operation in sectors with significant slave populations must include liberation objectives. We fight for freedom, all of it, not just the freedom to vote. That will slow our military operations significantly, Akbar warned. Then we'll fight a longer war, Mon Mothma replied. But we'll fight the right one. On Lothal, Admiral Constantine's battle group emerged from hyperspace to find the planet, fortified beyond all expectations. The primitive insurgents had vanished, not in retreat, but in coordination with rebel forces. Intelligence suggested they'd scattered across multiple systems, making targeted elimination impossible. Worse, the reports coming from other worlds were alarming. Slave uprisings on 3 mining colonies. Imperial overseers killed, prisoners freed and disappeared into rebel networks. And always, the same name being chanted. Spartacus. Constantine realized with cold certainty that he'd been outmaneuvered. The primitives hadn't been trying to hold territory. They'd been buying time to spread their infection, the idea that slaves could fight, could win, could be free. Burn Lothal. Constantine ordered. Full base Delta Zero protocol. Nothing survives. His officers hesitated. Sir, the economic losses. I don't care about economics. Constantine's control slipped. These insurgents have started something that threatens the fundamental order of the empire. We need to send a message that no one, primitive or otherwise, defies imperial authority and survives. The orbital bombardment of Lothal began at dawn, turning the mining settlements where Spartacus had first rebelled into glass and ash. The empire made its statement. This is what happens to those who resist. But the message had the opposite effect. Across the galaxy, in slave pens and mining camps and agricultural collectives, beings who'd never heard of Spartacus before learned his name now, learned that someone had fought the empire and survived, learned that chains could be broken. In a resistance cell on Ryloth, a Twi'lek child freed from the subjugator told her story to dozens of listeners. He said no one should be a slave, she explained, her voice carrying the conviction of belief. And then he made it true. On Coruscant, in his private chambers, Emperor Palpatine received reports about the uprising with dark amusement. Lord Vader stood beside him, a silent pillar of controlled power. This Spartacus interests me, Palpatine observed. A warrior from another universe, completely outside the Force, yet inspiring hope across the galaxy. He's disrupting careful plans, Lord Vader. He will be found and eliminated, Master. Vader's mechanical voice replied. No, Palpatine said thoughtfully. Let him fight. Let him inspire. Let the slaves believe they can win. Because, when we finally crush him, and we will, the lesson will be all the more powerful. Hope is only dangerous if it succeeds. Let Spartacus gather his army, win his little victories. And then, the Emperor smiled, will show the galaxy what happens to hope. But Palpatine, for all his dark wisdom, made the same mistake Rome had made. He underestimated a gladiator's understanding of sacrifice. He assumed Spartacus fought to win, when in truth, Spartacus fought to matter, to ensure that even if he fell, the idea he represented would survive. Aboard the Ghost, Spartacus stood with his remaining commanders, planning their next operation. The Rebel Alliance wanted them to hit an Imperial communications hub. Spartacus wanted to raid a slave processing center on Zygeria. They would do both, proving that military objectives and moral objectives weren't mutually exclusive. We've lost many, Crixus observed, reviewing their casualties. 3,000 gladiators dead since arriving in this galaxy. But we've freed tens of thousands. And every one of them can choose to fight, Naivia added. We're building something bigger than ourselves. Spartacus nodded, looking out at the stars, infinite, alien, but containing the same fundamental truth he'd always known. Freedom must be taken, never given. We are gladiators. We are slaves who refuse to remain slaves. And we will fight until every chain in this galaxy is broken or until we fall with honor. There is no middle ground. Gannicus raised a bottle of Corellian ale they'd liberated. To fallen brothers. To broken chains. To a war we'll probably lose but refuse to stop fighting. To Spartacus, the others echoed. And the name rang through the ship like a prayer and a promise. Across the galaxy, in 1,000 slave camps and 100 rebel cells, the legend was growing. Not the legend of a superhuman warrior, but something more dangerous, the legend of an ordinary man who decided that accepting oppression was worse than dying to resist it. The Empire could burn worlds, could kill millions, could bring overwhelming force to bear on any single point. But they couldn't kill an idea. And Spartacus had given the galaxy an idea that would outlive them all. I am Spartacus. And so are you. And together, no chain can hold us. The war that followed would be written in blood and broken chains across 100 worlds. Spartacus and his gladiators became a symbol that transcended their physical presence whenever slaves rose up, whenever the oppressed chose death over submission. The cry went up, I am Spartacus. The Empire hunted him relentlessly. Lord Vader himself eventually tracked the gladiator rebellion to a moon in the Atreus sector, and the confrontation between ancient warrior and dark Sith Lord became legend. They say Spartacus faced Vader with nothing but his gladius and the fury of a man who'd already lost everything. They say he lasted 17 seconds against the Dark Lord, an eternity. Considering Vader typically killed experienced Jedi in less than 10. But even as Spartacus fell, even as Vader's lightsaber found its mark, the slave rebellion he'd ignited continued to spread. The Rebel Alliance, forced to confront their own compromises, embraced total liberation as a core principle. Mon Mothma's famous proclamation of freedom, declaring all slaves in Alliance-controlled territory, immediately emancipated, came directly from Spartacus's influence. The gladiators who survived integrated into the rebellion, bringing their brutal efficiency to battles across the galaxy. Crixus died defending Hoth, buying time for evacuations with the same ferocity he'd shown against Rome. Naevia became a legendary operative, leading missions to free slaves. From the core to the rim, Gannicus survived the war entirely, retiring to a peaceful outer rim world where he trained younglings in combat, teaching them that courage wasn't the absence of fear but the choice to fight anyway. And in slave camps across the galaxy, in whispered conversations and secret meetings, the name Spartacus became code for resistance. Not as a call to a person, for the man was gone, but as a call to an idea. That freedom is worth dying for. And chains are meant to be broken. The Force may bind all things in the galaxy, but Spartacus proved that some forces existed outside its reach: the human will, the refusal to submit, and the power of those who would rather die standing than live kneeling. The Empire believed it had crushed him. The Sith thought they'd eliminated a threat, but they'd only created a martyr. And martyrs are far more dangerous than warriors.